Hello and welcome to the People's View. And today we have the Honorable Bill O'Brien, who's a former Speaker of the House, and for your information, a Speaker that I worked under in 2010 through 12 as a Vice Chair of the Public Works Commission. Bill, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate you having me. I really do. You know, it's exciting times. I'm doing a lot of these now that I've announced for the Senate,
Right.
and boy, it's just always a pleasure to come in and see you.
That's a bigger job than being Speaker of the House, I think.
It is a lot more effort,
Yeah.
although I put a lot in to become Speaker. You know,
Uh-huh.
at that point
Yes.
we went around the state and said to a lot of the activists, a lot of Republican voters, you know, talk to your reps and have them consider me, you know, and that worked out. Now I'm going to be talking to the host state and say, hey, let's consider what it means to have bipartisan leadership, to
Well,
have
I think
leadership at
that's what,
all in
yeah,
the
I
Senate.
think that's what we really did get some of that, not as much as you might have liked in that period, but you had a heck of a problem with the budget being so out of whack.
It was hugely out of
Yeah,
whack. You know, $1 billion. I mean, I know when you start getting into the millions and billions and the federal level trillions, people's eyes glaze over. But it was about 20% of the
right,
budget was a structural deficit. That means that the revenues that were going to come in were 20% below the level of spending from the budget that the Democrats had given us. If we just level funded, we would have had a huge
right.
problem. As a matter of fact, in New Hampshire, it would have been unconstitutional
Mm-hmm.
because you have to balance the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I told people when I was going around the state, and I'm sure I talked to you as well, I talked to everyone who is going to be a representative about the fact that we have to close that gap without taxes. If you remember, we were in the midst of a recession. You don't tax people,
Right.
especially when they're in a recession. You don't tax businesses. That's just going to keep jobs from being created. And we said, we'll do it with spending cuts. And moreover, there was, you might remember it, there was one particular tax increase that everybody found really obnoxious that they'd put in place. Actually, they put in place 83 new, remember that?
Right.
83 new taxes and fees. But one people always mentioned to me, and that was the motor vehicle
Right.
registration surcharge. And, you know, that was about $90 million a year. We were able to reduce that as well, get rid of that, not
Yeah.
reduce it, get rid of that surcharge.
Yeah.
And we put together a budget that, you know, it's been a few years now, and only the latest budget that has been passed by the Democrat-controlled legislature would exceed it. And fortunately, Governor Sununu has vetoed it. So
Mm-hmm.
good talks, I'm sure, are going on. We're going to try to keep this fiscal responsibility going.
Yeah, I hope he's as successful as you were in doing that,
Yeah.
because there's a number of things in there. I mean, he's already issued something like 40 vetoes on the legislation that came
Yeah,
through.
yeah, and I know Governor Sununu well enough to know that he doesn't take any joy in vetoing a bill. You
Mm-hmm.
want to have legislation that you can work with or do something, but all those are just bills that are have to go away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, another thing I remember during your speakership was some of the subcommittees that you had, especially the one on removing some of the rules and regulations.
Yeah, it just hasn't been done enough. You know, if you look at the prosperity we have going on now in this country,
Yeah.
you know, there's several reasons why it's going on, but a very important one is that following the 2008 recession that went on for a couple of years intensely, we never really took off after that, not
Mm-hmm.
like all the other recessions since World War II. And it's because there were increasing regulations. It's because we had a presidential administration then that was going around saying things like, I'm going to kill the coal
Mm-hmm.
industry, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and shutting down coal plants, shutting down mines, and so forth. That has a real deadening effect on the economy. Donald Trump came in and he said, you know, for you help me remember, was it every three
Yeah.
regulations, every regulation we put in,
We'll get
we'll
rid
go
of
over to
three.
three. And I think at one point he was up to 11 gone for one. And that just charges up the economy. That takes away resources that have to go into accommodating regulations to going back into figuring how to better provide services and how to better provide manufactured goods. And it just charges us up. the tax cuts are really good. You know, there
Yeah,
have been tax
that's right.
cuts for 85% of Americans,
Mhm.
but that deregulation effort has really given us a good prosperity here.
And you haven't heard of anything that was removed that has caused a problem.
Well, you know, it's funny. You hear all this rhetoric, you know, that life will get bad and people will be
Right.
deserted and families will suffer. And, you know, we can talk about that rhetoric because some of it just goes overboard. You know, Bernie Sanders saying 20,000 people will die and so forth. Um, but it was similar to when we had to cut the budget. We were hearing that, you know, there will be death, there'll be devastation. You know, I think even one opponent said, well, literally, I think he meant figuratively, but he
Yeah.
said literally, find grandma in the snowbank in
Right.
the springtime, thawing out. You know, she'll be gone. None of that happened. I dare say your viewers here don't remember anything of particular adverse effect. And the reason they don't is because we just didn't cut across the board. We looked at what government was doing
Right.
and what was essential and where in the future we could save money. We invested in that with a court system. But then we looked at what government doesn't have to go do and what government shouldn't do.
Hmm.
And in applying those kinds of tests, we were able to draw it back in really non-harmful ways.
And we also looked at some of the implementation of some of the good ones, good regulations, but they were just unfair in the way they were treating the smallest of the industries.
Yeah, and that was important at the time, and it's that concern that has led me
Mm.
to announce for the Senate. Do you know that Jeanne Shaheen, according to the National Federation of Independent Business, that's the premier nonpartisan national group for
Hmm.
small businesses, has said that she's voted against small businesses 80% of the
Uh,
time. 80%. Now, you know, that's bad across the country, but New Hampshire has an economy of small
right.
businesses. A lot of them are like those small business I started since I
Hmm.
was a speaker. I started a software company. We have 10 employees there.
Hmm.
We're the classical small business. She's voting against all those small
Hmm.
businesses. You know, she says she's putting New Hampshire first, but honestly, Carl, I think she must be confusing Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders with New Hampshire, because I'm sure they like that. But people who go to work for small businesses, for people who want to form small businesses, people who want to do what I'm trying to do is put food on the table, that's not voting for us.
No, no, no. I was a little surprised with Bernie Sanders' comment this morning of why we should have public insurance, not private insurance.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's great. You know, I mean, all we have to look at is the problems we've had with the VA
Right.
hospital system to understand what public insurance exclusively would mean. You know, they talk about death panels and they say, oh, we're not supposed to mention that at all. Britain has mandatory public health care.
Right.
And you know what that means? That when you get to be a certain age, even though you're losing sight in one eye, and it's a young age, you
Yeah.
know, relatively, it's 55 years old, as long as you're going to have one good eye left, the health service won't take care of you. There's a reason why Canadians, when they get sick, come to the U.S. if they have the ability to do it. And they pay our health costs, which are inflated by this government
Uh-huh.
controlled health insurance we have, but they are glad to pay it because they can get care.
Yeah, yeah. It's the same. The thing the one comment he said was that you can't have these private companies. All they want to do is make money. Well, they want to operate efficiently. They want to operate and make sure that the people get what they need, but that there's no false types of claims.
Well, that's such an unknowledgeable, I should use a synonym for that, I won't use an unknowledgeable thing to say.
Yeah.
I sat about 3 or 4 weeks ago with a fellow in New Hampshire that owns one of these outpatient surgical centers. And he said, you know, Bill, obviously a lot of what we do is covered by insurance, but there's two things we do, two areas of our operation that have relatively no insurance at all. That's plastic surgery and LASIK surgery, the surgery on your eyes so you
Right.
don't have to wear glasses and all that. He said, we've been doing both those 12, 14 years. the amount we charge our patients hasn't gone up. There's competition. And so what we have to learn how to do with that competition is two things. We have to be better than the competition. Our results have to be better. We have to make sure that it can be done as an outpatient treatment. And we can't increase our prices.
Yeah.
And he said, we're providing in those areas because we're forced into providing it. Better service for less money. And we've seen this in so many areas. Can you imagine if there were personal computer insurance, back 20 years ago, they said, oh, you should get insurance to buy your personal computer. Well, you remember the personal computers cost $10,000 then. Now you can get a good laptop for $300 or $400.
Right.
That's competition.
Right, right. And it happens in all, as you say, all different areas.
And when government gets involved, the service gets bad and it gets much more expensive. Let me give you another example out of Canada. I heard this the other day and it's mind-boggling. If your dog gets hurt, your pet gets hurt, you can usually arrange an MRI for the potential broken leg, something, within a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. On the other hand, if you get hurt in Canada, and if you need an MRI, it's going to take at least 3 or 4 months, and it can take a lot longer than that if you're not certified as truly injured.
Really?
There's not any health
Ridiculous.
insurance for dogs. There is for people. There's government insurance for people. The government does some things fairly brilliantly, and I think the founders of our country understood what they are. That's why they had those enumerated powers, listed powers in the Constitution. The federal government has to defend our borders, which maybe they're not doing so well now, but government can organize itself to provide a defense of the country, and I think we're all honored by those who step up to it. I think we understand we can do that very well. Government can do other things that the Constitution talks about, regulate commerce between the states. Basically, the Constitution anticipates that one state won't put a tariff on another, and if I work in Massachusetts, I can come up to New Hampshire and work, and if I'm a citizen of Massachusetts, I can start a business up there. Those are the sort of things the federal government does well. If it gets involved in anything else, it really is very harmful. Think of education. You and I are a little bit older. When we had our education, I don't think there was a U.S. Department of Education back then. And we got a great education. I know I did. I was taking Latin. I was taking German in schools, in a public school in Massachusetts. We had sciences, English. 4 years across the board. We had a very, very good education. And American students tested well against the world at that point. Now, because of the involvement of government and because of the involvement of the leadership of public unions constantly asking for more money and making money synonymous with education equality in people's minds, we spend more per capita than any country in the world for elementary and public and high school education, more than any country. When I was speaker, it was more than any country but Switzerland, but we've overtaken Switzerland. And yet our kids are testing 30 and 40 down, 30 or 40 countries down in many math and in language skills and in historical knowledge and so forth. Money doesn't equate to quality. As a matter of fact, in education, it sometimes gets in the way.
Well, yeah, there's lots of things going on, especially, I shouldn't say especially, but we just had some talk about Nashua and some of what they're doing with the feel-good type of approach to education. And the proposal of $4.5 million, I think, to add staff to take care of this throughout the whole school system. And that's something that really needs to be exposed, I think.
So I started my public service in New Hampshire in my little town at that point of Mount Vernon, and some folks came to me and said, we're having trouble getting somebody to run for the school board. And I said, well, I guess I should do it. I have enough time to do it, and that's what you do. In New Hampshire especially, we have a volunteer government, no career politicians, just volunteer government. No one gets paid up until you get to the constitutional officer, Secretary of State, governor, and so forth. And so I said, Sure, I'll step up to it. Now, when I was on the Mount Vernon School Board, really tiny, we had 247 kids, I think it
Uh,
was. And I was shocked at the time that we had around 80, 82 full-time equivalent positions in the school. I'm
really?
thinking, boy, that's a lot, you know. But
Wow.
that's everything from the
Yeah.
janitor up to the principal, you know, and so forth. And now Mount Vernon schools, if my understanding is, are down below 190 students,
Mhm.
and they have around 120, 130 full-time equivalent personnel in the school. And education isn't improving. We know that it's not improving.
Yeah.
You know, I remember reading this book by a name, I'll pull out the problem, you might have heard of, but others, Theodore White. He was the
Mhm.
biographer of
Mhm.
presidents. He was a Jewish kid that went to school in Dorchester, in Massachusetts, and he talks about the schools, and they were threadbare, you know, but what he got was a good classical education. It educated him in the great
Mhm.
writers and how to express himself and how to do the skills that allows one to be an adult. They educated him in how our government works. They educated him in the glory of the American experience.
Mhm.
And he went on to great things, you know, speechwriter and biographer
Mhm.
of John Kennedy and so forth. We're denying our kids that step up. He came from a very poor Jewish family in Dorchester and went on to national fame. We are taking that away from our kids.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, you know, we look at it and we say that's waste and everything, but we're taking away. You know, I did a radio show the other day, and they said, what does it mean to be a conservative, but don't mention fiscal responsibility? And it's a good question, because fiscal responsibility is the byproduct
Yeah.
of what it means to be a conservative. What it means to be a conservative is to um, be concerned about the sovereignty of an individual and telling individuals you're sovereign. As much as we can, we're going to treat you like adults who can
Mhm.
take care of yourself, but with it comes personal responsibility. To be a conservative, we want to preserve the balance, this genius of a system that our founders set up, where they understood, unlike the socialists now and the socialists in the past, including the National Socialists, you know, Nazism,
Mhm.
fascism,
Mhm.
and international socialism, communism. They understood there's no utopia.
Mhm.
They understood what we as Christians understand, that we're all flawed individuals, and they took that understanding and said, we have to have a government that balances itself,
Mhm.
so no portion of it can get so much power that it can take over the whole. And so, you know, we know the balance within the federal government, you know, judiciary and congressional and executive, but there was a balance between federal government and states.
Mhm.
They really believed, it wasn't a slogan, that these are sovereign states that have joined together, and we are not taking away certain of their prerogatives.
Mhm.
You know, since Wilson, really, but certainly World War II, we've invaded that. And it ends up disrupting this balance that equates to freedom, equates to opportunity, equates to people being able to choose for themselves and live well.
Mhm.
And you know, that's why I want to go to Washington. I want to
Mhm.
talk about restoring that. You know, the specific things such as the debt. You know, this
Right.
$22 trillion
Right.
debt. You remember what we did, Carl, when we went in? You know, among the things like reducing the budget and so
Mhm.
forth. The thing that I think offended people when they thought about it more than anything else about what had been done by the liberals in the prior budget is that for the first time in New Hampshire history, they borrowed money to pay for the operating expenses of government. Now that sounds pretty wonkish. You go, oh, what it means is that they were saying to our children and their children and our
Mhm.
children's descendants to come,
Mhm.
that we can't afford the government we want today, so you'll pay for it tomorrow and many tomorrows
Mhm.
thereafter.
Mhm.
Now, we found that offensive. We reversed it. It hasn't happened again. But look what the federal government's doing with this
Right.
huge debt we have. It has to be reversed.
Mhm.
I know people aren't talking about it now, but it's like the sword of Damocles hanging over our head.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be there. if we level fund the government, if we can find many,
Right.
many things to take away, but if we achieve overall level funding for about 5 or 6 years, tax receipts
down.
will catch up.
Yeah.
And we can start running surplus and giving our children's future back to them.
That actually started way back, 20 years ago, where we started paying down the debt, and then all of a sudden
At
it
one point.
reversed again.
Yeah, under Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich
Right.
and the Republicans forced Bill Clinton into it. You know, he was a little bit weakened by his own personal scandals and
Uh-huh.
was trying to, be accommodative and so forth. And we did. We started. It's not an impossible goal, but it is a crucial goal. We have to do that.
Yeah.
And that gives us an opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to say, shouldn't education be decided by teachers and parents and
Right.
school boards sitting together and figuring out what's good for the children of this community? It should be with states deciding, here's how we want to take care of those who are challenged by lack of income or disability and so forth. If the federal government gets out of those things, resources will be freed up, and states can make that choice. They can experiment. As Louis Brandeis said, we have 50 laboratories of experimentation in this government. So, and if you don't, if you and I don't want to live in California, I certainly don't right now, then we don't have to.
No.
If Illinois is going off the fiscal rails, we can leave. And
Some of that's happening.
and it is happening. It absolutely is happening. We always talk about that story with Maryland, where Maryland decided that they were going to do what we hear from many other states talking about doing now. They're going to tax the millionaires. And so I think it was pretty much anyone over $1 million worth of income, which is a heck of a lot of income. If anyone over $1 million, we're going to put a surcharge on. Now, if I have my figure right, not exactly right, it's in this order. They were getting around 230 million, I think it was, in tax receipts from individuals earning $1 million or more. And they put the surcharge in place, and it went down to 150 million because they just leave.
Yeah.
That's you vote with your feet.
Well, some of that happened in New Jersey too, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
And that's in Connecticut.
I can remember, I'm old enough to remember those debates both in New Jersey and in Connecticut. If we can bring in I think it was a sales tax on one and an income tax the other, we'll reduce property taxes. No, what has happened is they've just thrown more money into the pot, and government becomes used to receiving those receipts, and they want more. They still want more.
Well, it's going to be a big job to get when you get down there. How do you think you're going to handle that to get people to go along with your concept?
Oh, I think there's folks down there who are attentive to it. I've talked to some senators, and they're saying we need you down here. That we're building up a critical mass of senators who certainly, if you're talking 5 or 10, we can't control 100, but we can control a caucus. We can, what they call it, the conference down there. We can control our conference. And so we can start saying, right now the debate is going on, do we extend the debt ceiling?
Right.
And they can start saying that if you're going to have our participation, it is required that you be on a glide path, whether it's that 5 or 6 year glide path or even a little sooner, to running surpluses. We can't continue to do this.
Well, where you have any idea of where's the most vulnerable area? What area should be changed first, or do you have?
Oh,
any priorities?
I sure do. I sure do. I mean, we've mentioned some of them. We've mentioned the Department of Education.
Right.
It is not helping the education of children. We can look at the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy didn't come up with the concept of fracking. The Department of Energy didn't put us on a path that we have become an energy exporting country, soon to become a oil exporting country. The Department of Energy didn't do that. There's agencies within it that do certain things that need to be done, but the overall structure doesn't need to be there, and there's many things that they're trying to do that don't need to be done. Certainly out of this follows, some real benefits. Look what the Department of Education did to our colleges. They sent out that letter, dear colleague letter, you probably heard about it, saying that Title IX, which is a federal law that requires gender equality in colleges or anyone receiving government funds, and they said, you ought to basically take away the due process of people who are accused of sexual assault, and we've had just some horrendous examples of real discrimination against particularly young men. You know, I went into Boston the other day. I went through the area of Northeastern and all that, and I was sitting there next to my wife, and I said, I don't know, given what we read, how if we had a son now going to college, how we could send him down to one of these schools. You know, because they're really at risk. I mean, we've heard some horrible stories of just, you know, out and out lies being countenanced by these star chamber academic proceedings they have, where they don't let the accused bring in any witnesses. They don't let the accused ask questions of witnesses, and they'll throw them out of college. You know how devastating it is to be thrown out of a college because of an allegation or a finding
And
of
that's
sexual
on your
assault?
record.
It's on your record. You don't get into another college. They're destroying lives. You know, not a big issue, but certainly overall in the grand scheme of things. But certainly it is a big issue for those folks to whom it happens.
Well, I'll agree with you. Department of the Energy is really a bureaucratic mess.
It certainly is. It absolutely is.
You know? So, but there's I think you'll fit in fairly well down there, and I hope that it all goes well for you.
Well, I talked to a senator today who said almost exactly the same thing. He said, "We need you. You'll fit in well here. We need a lot more like you, but we certainly need you."
Well, Bill, I'd like you to come back as you go through your competition, I guess you might say, and talk about a couple of different things, a little bit more detail, so our audience can get to understand who you are and what you do.
Part of what we do is to present the Republican and conservative alternative, and that's going to win this election.
Right. Well, good luck.
Thank you, Carl.
We'll see you.
Okay.
And thank you for listening.